I don't care whether we live or die. I've got nothing to lose.
Following a 39-day hearing at the Old Bailey on the 5th of March 1969, Judge Melford Stevenson sentenced Ronnie and Reggie Kray to 30 years each, the longest sentence ever passed for murder at the time.
He was fearless, Ronnie, and he said to me, "I should just wrap dynamite around me. I'd just light the fuse and I'd take them all out with me." And he meant it.
Hi, I'm Nick from Underworld Uncut, and this week we're concluding our Chris Lambrianou series with recollections of the firm's many years spent in prison.
I was in Durham E-Wing, and the story of Durham E-Wing is very interesting because they came very early in the morning, and there's a story here because I'd had an argument with somebody. Somebody was bullying Connie Whitehead, and David Fraser was my next door neighbour in prison. And I finished up having this guy because he knew somebody was vulnerable and he was attacking Connie, and I knew Connie could have ate him alive but didn't, you understand? And I finished up giving the guy a smack to stop it happening. And so the very next morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, they came and got us. There was myself, there was Ronnie Bender, there was my brother Tony, there was Ronnie Kray, and there was Ian, 5 of us. And you've got this escort. We don't know where we're going. All we know, we've been told to pack our prison kit. We've got no externals. We've got nothing that we've brought into prison with us. All we've got is prison kit. So to move each one of us, they've got to have 2 dogs and 4 screws. So the first one goes out, which I think it was Ronnie Bender, who gets in a car, and he's got a screw on either side. He's got 2 screws in front with the driver. The next one out was me, and I looked out and I saw Nipperee, Cater, Lloyd Hughes, all the police officers, all standing on the lawn at Wandsworth Prison. And I looked and I thought, God, this is different than anything I've ever experienced before. And so then another 4 come out. So we all get into the cars. So there was a cavalcade. And there's motorcycle outriders, and there's a car in front and a car behind. And we're going up the motorway, and there's a helicopter above. But strangely enough, as we're going along the M1, we don't know where we're going. It could be absolutely anywhere. So as we're going along, one of these cars hits a bollard, because I suppose he was concentrating, looking at the cavalcade behind and all the rest of it. The bollard's gone up in the air and smashed down on the bonnet of another car. So the cars have like concertinaed. The screw beside me, he's going, "We're going to be killed. I said, "Shut up, because I don't care whether we live or die. I've got nothing to lose." I said, "We're not going to die." I said, "You're still alive. You're still here. Just remain calm." I'm telling him, the other one on the other side, he's right. I said, "No, he's not right. Calm down." Anyway, before I knew it, you've got this part of the motorway, there's hills. You're going between hills. There were armed police officers with rifles came, and they were standing along the ridges. You had helicopter overhead, and within a matter of, I'd say, even minutes, there were new police cars there to take us up to Durham, and they left the broken ones or the damaged ones there. When we get up to Durham, the chief constable said these people were so dangerous that if they needed to or wanted to, they could get a chieftain tank and push it through the wall of Durham prison and get these people out. So what we were done, we were confined to a wing of maybe 10, 12 cells, and in them 10 or 12 cells was Bruce Reynolds, a train robber, Joe Martin, bank robber, there was Tony Dunford, there was my Tony, there was Ronnie Bender, Ronnie Kray, myself and Ian Barry. That was us all together. And that's how it remained for about maybe 6 or 7 months. If you went on exercise, there was a cage, a literal cage, where, because there was only 7 of you on that wing, you were considered to be the most dangerous men within the system. And the only way they could control you is having this unit, small unit. There were 3 units. There was Durham E-Wing, there was Leicester Security Wing, which is known as a submarine, and there was Parkhurst on the Isle of Wight. They were the 3 top security wings. And so, you know, we would be there. They had padded cells there and everything, you know. All we looked at, this is the way they judge us. This is the way they see us, that we are the most dangerous people. You didn't feel like the most dangerous because you're still ordinary inside. You still, you know, you weren't 24/7 a criminal. You were also somebody who went in the shop and bought a packet of cigarettes. You were somebody who went and bought bread and milk if you needed it. You were ordinary. So that's what you reverted back to. There was, what did I have to prove to Ronnie Kray? What did I have to prove to Ronnie Bender or Tony? All these people knew me. Bruce Reynolds, he was a train robber. Now he's like us. He's got all the same fears and anxiety. He might lose his family. He loves his son. He loves his wife. You know, he's had some times out there, but he's looking back and he's also thinking, was it worth it? Ronnie went to Broadmoor, and that was evident because he was on a thing called Stemisol. And when he didn't have Stemisol, he was out of control. It's like when you had the bottle in your hand, you could control it, you could do stuff with it. But when the bottle went on the floor, it turned into a snake, and that was the way you know, Ronnie was. He was a very dangerous man when he didn't have it, and you knew when he didn't have it. Where Reggie didn't need that kind of medication. Reggie occasionally took a bit of speed, but that was more to front things up. He had more of a business brain. He'd think about earning money and all that kind of thing. Ronnie had that thing, he had to have it now. He had to buy a Waltham watch, he had to buy a Rolex watch, he had to do this, he had to do that. And that was the difference. But one was quiet, but the other one, when he didn't, you know, when he needed money to go and live the kind of lifestyle he wanted. But both of them had found this house down in Suffolk, and they had this plan to go straight and to go down there and retire. It was never going to happen. They were never going to make that. You know, they could have made it. They could have been very rich people. And I often wondered why they didn't, you know, go to somewhere like the Hilton and have a boardroom up there where people could sit down and exchange ideas and all the rest of it. But that wasn't the way they thought. They were very old-fashioned in their way. They liked the old pubs. And if you ever wanted to see the twins, you'd go into the Widow's pub, and there'd be an old tramp there, and you'd be going suited and booted, and the old tramp would say, "You looking for Reggie and Ronnie?" And you go, "Yeah, got to meet with them." "What's your name?" And you tell them, and they'd say, tell you where they were. You know, they were never where you expected them to be. They were somewhere else. And they had these tramps in different places, poor people who would be there and advise you where to go and all the rest of it. And that's just the way they were. Incredible people in the way that I've never met anybody like them, to be honest. It was just the way they were. Like, if a snail's got a shell, you know, or a tortoise or anything else like that, they had that shell over them. And they peeked out and looked around, but people wouldn't let them be normal. They wanted Reggie and Ronnie. No, I think that, to be honest with you, I think that possibly if Ronnie had gone to prison, I think that Reggie would have straightened himself up, because he'd have come under the influence of different people and not under the influence of Ronnie. I think Ronnie didn't come under anybody's influence, because I'll give you one instance. The Glasgow firm had said they were going to have Ronnie over. And Ronnie got on a train and went up to Glasgow, and they met him off the train and took him to a house, and he sat there with them. He said, "Well, I think we've got problems, haven't we?" And they turned around, "The man like with your bottle, no, we ain't got no problems." They could not believe that he could have the front to go and face them, because there were kind of some naughty people living up in Scotland at the time. There was Arthur Thompson, who often came down to London. I met him down there quite a few times, and there were Scottish faces, but they admired him for his courage and guts to go up there and face them, because he went into the unknown. He was fearless, Ronnie, and there was a rumour going round that somebody was going to try and kill Reggie. And he said to me, "Well, if ever they try that on, He said I should just wrap dynamite around me and I'd just light the fuse and I'd take them all out with me. And he meant it. It was beyond a love affair. It was spiritual between the two of them. You know, I just think that Reggie without Ronnie wouldn't have been whole. And I think that, you know, Ronnie without Reggie wouldn't have been whole. And I think splitting them up, Reggie in prison and Ronnie in Broadmoor, didn't do any of them any good. But it couldn't be any other way, unfortunately, because the difference in the two, you understand, Ronnie was mentally unstable and Reggie was so full of grief. His dreams and his hopes, and I think they all died, really, when Francis died. I was in my cell this day, and Charlie Richards was in the next cell, and we used to have a chat every day, give me books and stuff like that, and I'd give him them. And this day he said to me, Chris, I need to come and have a chat. And I said, no, Charlie, I want to be on my own. And laying there thinking, I thought about who could cry a tear for all the people in this jail. It was Maidstone Jail at the time, just one tear. And then I began to think about the effects prison has. It's like a tide that goes out, and it affects everybody. It affects families, it affects friends, it affects communities, it affects everybody, it affects school, it affects the children from that age to that age. It is so destructive. And I had chosen that over my wife and my child. And that was very hard to bear. No, they didn't have a family like that. They didn't have a wife and a child. My little girl, she came up to visit me and she tried to take the keys off the prison officer and give them to me. She was only about 18 months old, just learning to walk. And then I never saw her for many years afterwards. You know, it was just because I could not. My wife wouldn't let her come up. My wife decided she couldn't cope with it. Just finished. That was her and I, you know. And then I went through the Royal Courts of Justice to try and get access, and I stood up in front of Justice Lane and I told her, I said, you did not make me a father. A greater hand than yours made me a father. And I want to be that, but you're going to stop me. And she had this right opinion of me, like, you know, I'm a common criminal, all the rest of it, really bad lot. But when she heard me speak, her voice quietened down and she kind of talked to me. And she said, Mr. Lambrianou, let me tell you this. Your daughter's going to need a great deal of help. It would be advisable if she could talk to a child psychologist, because to deal with something of this magnitude and the criminal, you know, background to your case and everything else like that, I can't allow you access because it'd be too damaging for her. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to allow you one letter a year and also a current photograph. And my wife sent me one letter and one photograph, but she felt so uncomfortable doing that. I could sense that. I sent her a letter and freed her from it. And I never got anything else. And the story ends there because during the time they were making the Kray film for Canon Classic, Charlie Kray and my brother Tony went into the offices in Wardour Street, and my daughter was working there as a secretary. And she said, I think you know my dad. And Charlie Kray said, oh yeah, another one. And she said, no, it's Chris Lambrianou. And he said, would you like to meet him? And she said, yeah, I would very much. I've been searching for him. She's 19 years of age. And I arranged to meet her down at Marylebone Station. And Tony brought her along in his car. And I bought a massive big bunch of flowers and I met her. And Tony said, where do you want to go? I said, I want to go to the Serpentine. He said, what do you want to go to the Serpentine for? I said, I just want to go there, Tony, take me. And we went there, and he said, well, I'm going, I'll see you later. And I got a boat and rode out into the middle of the Serpentine, and I just talked to her. I wanted to be away from the world. I wanted just her alive. But going back to prison, we then were put into, we went to Leicester Security Wing, where once again there was the train robbers, Freddie Foreman, myself, Tony, Ronnie Bender, and that was about 9 of us kept in this unit. Once again, with a cage where we used to exercise. We were not part of the normal prison system. There was a bulletproof glass, you know, that they looked through at us, and everything was kind of, the screws would come round, unlock the door, you go out and exercise. There was no work, there was nothing to do. You were just dying inside, dying of boredom. So a lot of us, you know, got into books, got into literature. And I remember Charlie Rich was down there. And I got to know Charlie Richardson, and I liked the man. I never saw a violent man or even a dangerous man. What I saw was a man fighting his own battles, but a man who was striving to get educated. And Bruce Reynolds was the same. And them two guys between them, I remember Bruce Reynolds saying to me, he said, Chris, he said, watch what the clever ones are doing and do likewise. And the clever ones weren't acting tough and gangsterish and all the rest of it, or robbing. They were reading. They were getting into literature. They were going along to studies and things like that. And the Charlie would give you a book. He'd tell you a story. He was a compassionate man, and I learnt so much from him, so much about going straight. Hence, he was part of my 32 years out on the street. You know, if I hadn't have met Charlie and picked up on some of the things, the books he told me to read and stuff like that, he was an educator. And he did probably a lot more for me than the system did. But the system only saw Charlie as this dangerous gangster, puller out of teeth or electrodes and all the rest of it. There weren't Charlie Richardson I knew. Well, I mean, I'd met John Pearson before he ever wrote the book, The Profession of Violence. And to me, I'm being honest with you, it was a load of tosh. It really was. I mean, it was a psychological book about the Krays. I mean, Ronnie Kray used to laugh about it, but John Pearson, he put him up in a flat in the East End. And he complained to Ronnie that he had cold water. And the bed was hard and so on and so forth. And Ronnie, he said, can you move me? And Ronnie Kray said, no. You wanted to know what it's like in the East End? It's like that. There is damp. There is cold water. You won't have a bath when you want one. Otherwise you get a tin bath out and you have it in that. You know, you want to experience it, experience it. So, yeah, I mean, there was that. But then the other books came out as well. And it was a world, it wasn't like I knew it, you understand? It was, a lot of it was fantasy. I mean, you've got so many books out now that people have writ, but didn't even know them. You've got people, I brought down the Krays. No, you didn't bring down the Krays. The Krays were brought down by their own firm or brought down by the barmaid. And if anybody, I'd say the barmaid brought them down. And the system brought them down. You know, because the system, apparently, from what I'm hearing, a lot of the evidence they had, they should have given to the prosecution, they didn't give it. So in that case, believe me, and I will say this now and forever, that was political. That came down from above. The minute they got involved with Boothby and Dryburgh and all them kind of people, they had to be brought down, and that was the order of the day. And anybody who was around, connected to them in any way, was going down as well, for good or bad. And that's the way I saw it. I think what they did, they got money out of, they ran charities and stuff like that. Money was raised. They had evenings where people would raise money for them and all the rest of it. And I think they got their money that way. They got money out of the film, which was quickly spent. I mean, I believe that Ronnie's bar bill in Broadmoor was something like $7,000. Now, you can look at me in shock, but in actual fact, that's the truth, because he had a bill behind the bar, and it was on near beers and stuff like that, and he'd be buying things for different people in Broadmoor. So £7,000 quickly went, and as I believe, so I've been told there was very little money left, you know, from the film. It just went like nothing. And that film's been going the rounds for an awful long time. What did I think of the film? I think it did the Kemp brothers an awful lot of good. You know, I just, you know, it's a pop film. It was difficult. So what I used to do was go on to New Street Station. Tony was in, they didn't want us to build a power base, so they put Tony in Wormwood Scrubs Hostel, and I was going to go, I went to Birmingham, prison in Birmingham, Winston Green, and I was on the hostel there. And so for the first kind of couple of weeks, I would go to New Street Station, and I would sit there and watch the way people interacted with each other. You've got to remember, we don't see women. In our day, there was no women prison officers. So everything we know about women, we're reading from pornographic books. And we think every woman is just a slag. You understand what I mean? Every woman is, you know, go with anybody, do anything, and that's the way you kind of view them. But I knew that wasn't the truth. So I want to see human action. And I sit on the station and I watch people coming and going, meeting each other, greeting each other, wife putting her arms around her husband, you know, the husband, like, joy on his face, little children to see their dad or their mum, you know what I mean? I got the whole picture, black and white, you know, the whole thing. And I'd go and have a coffee in a coffee bar there, just a normal coffee bar, and watch people talking to each other. You know, I'd not done that in years. I mean, I was kind of, it was all a new world to me. And I can remember the screw saying to me, he said, Lambrianou, he said, you're not looking for work. He said, we're thinking about putting you back behind the wall. I didn't never want to go back behind that wall. I'd been back behind the wall for 15 years. And for the first time I could see the stars and, you know, the moon. I could do things. So I kind of, that's really where I wanted to be. But, you know, circumstances, I've been very blessed in my life. Was one of the guys there broke his bail hostel thing, and he had a job as a carpenter, and he lost his place on the hostel, and so I said, the screw said, you're going to put me back behind the wall. I said, look, because he thought I was up to gangsterism stuff and all that, but he didn't know I was sitting on a station doing what I was doing, and so I said, is that guy coming back? He said, no. He said, he's lost his place on the hostel. I said, well, he had a job. Why don't you take me for his job? He went, you don't really want a job. I said, no, you take me. And he picked the challenge up and he came with me. And we went to this company called C&E Roofing. And I spoke with the director there. But the screw talked to him before and he think, well, you know who this guy is. He's involved with this, so. And I went in. The guy said to me, you ever interfered with children? I said, no. Have you ever bashed up old women? I said, no. He said, you ever robbed any poor people? I said, no, I haven't. He said, right. He said, you start Monday morning. The screw was totally blown away by this. But I had to get a hammer and kind of screwdrivers and things. So I managed to buy a hammer for £1. And I mean, a saw, I think I paid about £3 or £4 for that. So I've got them in a bag and I turn up there and he says to me, do this job. And he put me with this guy called Alan, who knew that I'd, you know, kind of done an awful lot of bird, and he was going to give me grief. You know, so I thought myself, I'd had enough of him this day and I just put him in his place. So they decided to let me go and work on my own. So they said to me, look, there's an outside guttering, sort that out, fascia board. I've got up there, I've made a pig's ear of it, I'm not a carpenter. But there's a little old black man. I've seen him standing there for about a week, and he's got a boiler suit done up to there and a trilby hat on. I said, excuse me, mate. I said, who you work for? He said, C&E Roofing. I said, well, I've seen you standing there for a week. He said, yeah, they're going to give me a job. I said, well, they ain't giving you one in a week. They're not going to give you one. The reason is you're black. and they're not going to give you a job because of that reason. I said, but I'll tell you what, I'll give you a job. We got a right idiot working at this firm. I said, come along, I'll show you what he done. I said, see that fascia board? He put that up there. I said, look at the mess he's made of that. Do you think you could sort that out? And I'm testing him out. And he said, yeah, he said, I'll have a go at that. Very humble man. And I went off to have a cup of coffee, and I came back about an hour later, and he had done the most perfect job. And I said, what's your name? He said, Joe. I said, well, I'm Chris. I said, I'm the idiot who done that. I said, I'm not a carpenter. I said, but I tell you what I am, Joe. I'm the best labourer you'll ever meet in your life. And I said, can we work together? He said, yeah, we can. And him and I, we worked together. And I said to him one day, I said, Joe, look, see these roofs? I said, we can go on piecework. I'll get a chainsaw, I said, and we'll go through these. He said, Chris, slow down. He said, we're craftsmen, not butchers. And another time, we could get the Welsh blue slates off and we could sell them. And I said, Joe, like, what about it? He said, no, we don't take something that doesn't belong to us. But everybody took it for granted you could have them, but not Joe. He was an honest man. And it was like my father died in prison. It was like I found my father again. Joe, you know, it's... and then I did my time was there, finished, and I'd met a girl in Banbury and who stood by me. And so I had to go down there. And I thought my brother had a job for me down there because I'd taken sitting guilds and got a welding degree. And I'd go and work out in Saudi. And Joe was in tears when I left. He said, you know, but I knew he was safe then. I knew we were both safe. He'd been a real blessing to me, and I think I had to him, you know. So I had good help along the way. No, because I didn't want to be used, to be honest with you. And it seemed to me that they used an awful lot of people to do their running about and do that. I was too busy bringing up 5 children. You know, I mean, I've got my 2 twins. You know, I had my own twins. You know, they became priority to me. You know, I loved pushing them in a chair, going through the village, singing to them in the morning, you know, and all that kind of thing. I took them all to church, 5 of them to church, every Sunday to St Aldate's in Oxford. And then, because what I wanted to do, might sound crazy to you, but for me, some of the finest educators in England are in Oxford. And a lot of them people go to church and they do good works within the church. So Sunday school, they were getting the very best. I got a telephone call telling me Ronnie had died. And I'd been to a funeral prior to that, and I spoke to somebody there, and I said, why are you here? And they said, I've come to see all the gangsters. I said, did you actually know this person who died? And this woman said, no, I haven't. She said, but I like the glitz of it all and everything else. And when I didn't realise the funeral was going to be that big, but I didn't go. Because I, out of respect, I can say my goodbyes, I can say my farewells in a quiet way, you know, instead of, you know, there were thousands there at that funeral. And then there was Reggie's funeral, just the same, another circus. And I didn't want to join it. And then my brother Tony died, and he had the same kind of circus. Because what happens is people take over. And they want to glam it up, and they want to have this kind of circus that goes with it. And if I remember one thing about my brother's funeral, it was Jamie Foreman. And he said I stood at the graveside with him, and I was saying my goodbye, but I can remember him saying, Tony, you were a friend. It was good to know you. And at some other stage we'll meet again. And I felt that was very humble and very quiet, and not, you know, I'm here, I'm suited and booted and all the rest of it, and that. And I respected him for the way he did that. But then there were other funerals. I mean, Bruce Reynolds, I was away with him and I went there. Charlie's, of course, I went there. And, you know, And Joe Piles, another one, turned into a circus. And I think funerals are private things where you go along and you say your goodbye and you're just grateful for that person being in your life. I wasn't grateful that the Krays were in my life, to be honest with you. I had 15 years to regret it. So, but, you know, I don't think I ever wished them ill or anything else like that. My regret is I let my family down. And that's in retrospect. I wasn't a perfect human being. I should have been. But I couldn't do it. I could not do it. The legacy of the Krays. Crime don't pay. Charlie Kray died in prison. Reggie Kray died in prison. Ronnie Kray died in prison. For whatever they achieved in life was such a small amount to what they might have achieved. What they could have done, the possibilities that lay within them men for good. And yet they choose to just drop everything down the drain like it didn't matter, really. They sold themselves cheaply. That's what I believe. I believe there's so much they could have done. If it was criminal, they could have been a bit more professional. If it was for good, they could have reached heights. But their lives were dashed to 3 people to die in prison. That's a testimony itself that crime doesn't pay. I've been out of prison 32 years now. I've had some wonderful experiences. You know, whatever I found in prison works. You know, I've never been back, except to give talks or whatever, you know, or maybe to warn people, crime doesn't work, it doesn't pay.
Thanks for watching this mini-series on Chris Lambrianou. For more content on the Krays and other notorious gangsters, make sure to like, hype and subscribe. I'm Nick from Underworld Uncut. We'll see you next time.